So I finally saw Annihilation. It was a pretty big disappointment. I'll get to why at the end of this video. I'm going to explain everything that happened, all the questions you might have. I'm going to start with the more concrete, literal ones, like what actually happened. Try to explain the science. This is going to be the most frustrating part because I don't think it's meant to entirely make sense, and then I'll move to more abstract, metaphorical questions. So what actually hits the lighthouse? Now, most people seem to talk about it as if it's an actual alien being. I think it makes more sense to think of it as an alien weapon, in particular a terraforming weapon. So aliens, they see our planet, and for whatever reason, they want to change the makeup of our planet, either to make it more hospitable to them to live there, to create new resources they can mine, or just to experiment and try to create new forms of life, to try to see what they can create. So they send this weapon, it hits the lighthouse, it burrows down, and then we see right at the core of the lighthouse, we see what seems like a singularity. So a singularity in physics is where the normal physical laws no longer apply, start to break down. A black hole is one example. This doesn't seem like a physics singularity. It seems like a weird kind of biological singularity where you see strange things happening. So you see Jennifer Jason Leigh's character, you see her transform into her component parts of pure light. You see this swirling energy vortex. You see doppelgangers get created. You don't see this at any other part of the Shimmer. So it seems like at the core, there's this kind of singularity where very strange things on a biological level are happening. And then from this singularity, we see this expanding sphere of influence called the Shimmer. And within this Shimmer, weird things happen, and I'll get into what is actually happening within this sphere of influence. But remember, at the core seems to be the singularity. So what actually occurs in the Shimmer? We see three different things. We see mutations occurring much more than they do normally. We see a kind of hybridization, which doesn't seem to be animals just mutating on their own. It seems to be animals either mutating based on the environment around them and the other organisms around them, or just swapping genes with what's around them. It's unclear whether this is connected to the mutation or a completely separate thing. And then we also see memories of the creatures, in particular humans that are in there, actually having their memories actually manifest in a physical way. And again, this is completely different than the actual genes and mutation part of it. This is a third separate thing. So we hear that the Shimmer is a prism, is like a prism. It's unclear why it's like a prism. So a prism, you can look it up on Google Images. It just takes light, goes through a prism, and then it splits it into its different colors. So you could say that when an organism walks into the Shimmer and is within the Shimmer, all their DNA gets jumbled and scrambled. Again, it's not a perfect analogy, but I guess when DNA is jumbled and scrambled, well, that's mutation. So basically this is constantly happening when you're in the Shimmer, or maybe it just happens initially right when you get in there and then it's done, it's happened, and that's it. But either way, we have this kind of genetic scrambling, which I guess is like a prism. And then we hear the term refraction a lot. Now, again, it's not entirely clear why this applies. Refraction is when light is going into water and then it changes its speed because it's in a different medium. And then it's kind of connected to a prism because in a prism, the different wavelengths of light get reflected to a different degree when it changes mediums. We actually see an example, that thing everyone talks about where you see their hands through the glass of water. So that's an example of refraction. You're seeing the beam of light change speeds, and that's why their hand, it's in a different position, it looks like, relative to where you're seeing it in the water, because the beam of light has changed speed. So how this connects, it's not clear unless at the fundamental DNA sequence level, the A's travel a bit more than the T's, than the C's, than the G's, so they all kind of move around within the genetic code. Again, unclear. But this brings us to the second thing that happens within the Shimmer, is this kind of hybridization. Now, when the bear screams with her voice, this has nothing to do with mutations, because it's not like the bear had genes that mutated to create a throat that was just like her throat and also created an amygdala that was just like her fear response. So this isn't happening at a kind of gene genetic mutation level. No, this is the bear just taking an aspect of her and using it. And we see this also with the house. So we see Natalie Portman's character, we see her house in the Shimmer exactly like it was outside the Shimmer. So it's not like the ground has DNA and then took some genes from Natalie Portman's DNA and her DNA has memories of the house. No, none of that's true. So again, this is just completely separate from the mutation thing. Somehow in the Shimmer, our desires, our memories kind of get manifest in a physical way. And it seems like maybe the effects of the Shimmer aren't uniform throughout. So at the very peripheral, all we see is this sped up mutation. So you see something like the extra row of teeth that the alligator has. That could just be a random mutation from mutation being sped up. Then as we get further into the Shimmer, we see this kind of mutation, but based on the things around you. So things are still mutating at a faster pace, but now these aren't random mutations, they're mutations that are drawing on the traits of the creatures around it. And then we get very deep in the Shimmer, and it's not even mutation at this point, it's just traits of one thing are actually just leaping over onto another thing. And then at the very, very core, we see this doppelganger effect where you actually see copies of a creature getting created. And how Natalie Portman's character actually destroys the Shimmer is she uses a combination of the doppelganger effect, where a doppelganger first created right at the core, and then this hybridization where organisms draw traits from you, so she seems to transfer her self-destruction onto this doppelganger that's created right at the core, and somehow this seems to switch the fundamental essence of the Shimmer from expansion to contraction and self-destruction. Okay, so last science thing before I get into the fun stuff, the metaphors. Now, Hawk's genes, that's mentioned, that's name dropped. So what are Hawk's genes? Hawk's genes, they looked at flies that had mutations where things were in the wrong place on the flies, like legs where the head was supposed to be, and they realized there was a mutation in the Hawk's genes. So Hawk's genes are just genes on any animal that controls where things get put. So when she sees the plants and she says, oh, they probably have human Hawk's genes, that just means that the plants at their DNA, they either had a mutation that just happened to result in the exact same genes that humans have that say where to put things, and that's why the plants look like humans do, or humans were walking by and then the genes just hopped over and now the plants have those human Hawk's genes that tell them to put all their still plant stuff, but in the same locations that things are on humans. Okay, now I want to address two theories that people have made that I don't think are true. Now, the first theory is that the Shimmer, it's an alien organism with a goal and ambitions, and it created this elaborate scheme that it was going to send a copy of Natalie Portman's boyfriend back out, have it collapse in front of her. This would somehow cause guilt in her and make her want to come into the Shimmer to try to unlock the secret of it so she could save her boyfriend, lure her all the way to the core, infect her. She doesn't have to be lured to the core, but just lure her into the Shimmer. Eventually she gets infected with the alien DNA. Then she's going to go back out safe and sound, have sex with her boyfriend, who also has the DNA because he's just a pure copy, a pure doppelganger, and then they're going to have a baby, which is a super alien baby with all the DNA, and this is its scheme for world domination. Now, a lot of things, one, this is incredibly convoluted, and it's not a very good plan. The fact that it actually ended up working, it relies on so many variables. Two, unless all the DNA was recessive, it doesn't make any sense for why it would need both people having a baby to have the alien DNA. Honestly, if either person had alien DNA and then had sex with someone who had normal DNA, this should create a baby with lots of DNA, alien DNA being expressed. We've seen this alien DNA be pretty powerful, so there's no reason why it would all be recessive and they would need both parents. So a lot of things don't make sense. What I think the theory that makes a little more sense is this was maybe all a convoluted, elaborate plan for the organism to kill itself, because it had a death wish like anyone else, and it realized the only way for it to kill itself was to lure this person who had all this guilt and all this self-destructive want to hurt itself, lure it to its core, take that trait of wanting to hurt yourself over guilt and be self-destructive, and then that was the only way that this organism, which was out of control and destructive, could kill itself. But ultimately, I don't think either of those theories are true, because my view of the Shimmer is that it's a kind of weapon and it doesn't have a consciousness. I don't think we ever see a kind of localized being that's within the Shimmer that's kind of the point of consciousness, and I don't think it makes sense that it's this huge hive mind collective consciousness. So anyways, moving on. Why do they have this debate where Natalie Portman says, oh, God makes mistakes, her boyfriend disagrees? I think that's a very interesting line of dialogue, because this whole thing is about evolution and cancer and mutation, and if you believe that evolution is what created all these forms of life, well, evolution, it's a cliche at this point, evolution used only one thing, which is mistakes. So evolution is basically when cells, or evolution comes from mutation, where mutations comes from is cells. When they're dividing and they're trying to create copies of each other, sometimes this process screws up, and rather than an exact copy, a mistake is made, and there's something that's not an exact copy, and some of these mutations create advantages for survival. Then these beings with these mutations reproduce more, and eventually the mutation spreads throughout. So it's a very interesting debate about, does God make mistakes, when if you believe in evolution as a driver of a lot of the life that we see, evolution is all about mistake, and mistake is the primary way that beings evolve. Okay, so why does Natalie Portman face a doppelganger? Why does she seem to face herself as the ultimate enemy she has to defeat? So there's this whole idea of facing your fears or your own worst enemy, but I really like this idea of how oftentimes we think of aliens and we think of them being as completely incomprehensible to us, kind of Lovecraftian horror, but this idea of aliens as being what's the most foreign, what's the most scary, is this kind of shadow self to us, and this kind of being that is just like us, looks just like us, but is different in some way and is not us. So it's this idea of evil being much closer to us and much more like us than we like to admit, rather than some kind of monster we can't even comprehend. And we get to this idea that if an alien force, some kind of force, wanted to subjugate us and wanted to kill us, they wouldn't use themselves as this kind of battle, and it would be a battle between two sides. No, they would find a way to turn elements of ourselves against each other, and they would try to find a way to get either human beings to fight each other, or they would try to turn elements of our environment against ourselves. And then we get to this idea of cancer. So cancer is not autoimmune, the body attacking itself, but it is in some sense your own body starting to break down. In your own body, there's something within you that it's not something external that you can fight and defeat. It's something internal to you that's actually your own downfall. And then we get to this idea of cancer and immortality. So Henrietta Lacks gets names dropped. Now who she was she had cancer, and scientists took her cells, and she's now long dead, but her cells, her cancer cells, they're still alive. They're immortal cells. So it's very interesting. Is she still alive in some sense? Now obviously the cancer, maybe she wouldn't consider the cancer to be a part of her. It's what killed her. But the fact that those cancer cells are alive, most people would say, no, she's not alive in any sense. But, some people might disagree. Now with cancer, is cancer the key to immortality, or is cancer symbolic of the death and the death drive that kills us all? So it's so interesting. It shows that fine line between immortality and what kills us. So with cancer, all cells, they have this programmed into them to die and stop replicating. With cancer, that's flipped off. So the cell just keeps going and keeps dividing and is in some sense unkillable, immortal, until it kills its host and kind of the being that it's inside. So really cancer in some sense, it's like immortality gone haywire, and the only way that the immortality ends is not by the actual cancer cells dying, it's by their environment dying. So it's interesting to think about humans as a species that just grows and grows and grows, has no natural predator, seems to be invincible. The only way that humans would really die was if they just spread so much that they overload the planet. In this case, the planet is the body that's afflicted with cancer, and then humans die. So it's very interesting, and you see cancer as that, as that fine line between immortality and like total extinction and death. And now I have to talk about fractals really quick. So with fractals, if you look at it from a macro scale and you look at it, the really large things, and then you look at it from a micro scale and look at the really small things, they look exactly the same. So it's this idea that the cell with cancer as a kind of microcosm with this self-destructive drive, and then if you look at it at the macro, we as humans have the exact same drive. So this is name dropped a couple times now. All the shapes that you see, apparently there's this guy Mandelbrot, now he came up with this idea of fractals. There's a shape named after him called the Mandel bulb, I think. That's what all the shapes look like. So I do think there is this idea that a lot of the things you see in the movie, they kind of work on two levels, at a kind of like molecular cellular level, and then also you see the parallel at a macro human scale. And then last thing I'll say about immortality, we get this idea of, is there things worse than death? So we see that if you live on, if a part of you lives on through the thing that actually killed you, is that in some sense even worse than dying and be completely annihilated and wiped out completely? So we see this with the bear, that the bear takes her scream, and in some sense there's still like a part of her living on in this sick way. And then also with Natalie Portman's boyfriend, we see in some sense he's still living on. There's still something with the same cells and the same gene expressions and like a clone of him with all these things that are the same as him, but what that came from is what killed him. That comes from the Shimmer, which is what caused his death. So in some sense, is that even more perverse than him just being dead, that now there's this part of him living on that's actually a part of what killed him. So there's that whole thing as well. And this actually brings us to the important question that everyone wants to know: is she a clone at the end? Is she a doppelganger? Now, this is a cop-out answer, but I don't think it matters. I think the important part is we as the audience have to ask ourselves, when we see these two individuals at the end, are they the same people as we saw in the flashbacks we see of them as husband and wife? Are these the same people at the end of the movie? Now, if you take her boyfriend, he is a completely different copy. We know that, but he doesn't have the same memories as well. That's important, but he has the same DNA, the same cells. He looks the same. He has the same appearance. He probably has the same fundamental drives, like what he wants to get out of life, what deep down makes him happy. He probably has the same fears, the same insecurities, the same reactions to things. He'd probably react the same, find the same things funny. So it's funny to think, most people would say, no, clearly he's not, but he really is so similar in so many ways. And would it change if he still remembered things? If he had the same memories as the person he was cloned from, would that change people's minds at all? Because then he'd almost be indistinguishable. He'd react the same, he'd think the same, so he'd almost be indistinguishable from the real person. But no, technically he's not the same person that was there originally. Now let's move to Natalie Portman. She is, now, first of all, for the sake of this argument, I'll say she's not a clone. She's the same person, but she has new DNA. And her DNA is changing, and she's getting new cells, and we get to this idea, it's kind of like the ship of Theseus. There's a philosophical problem where if you have a ship, and the ship's going across the ocean, and they change every part of the ship, they take every single piece of the ship, and they switch it out with a new part, at the end of the journey, is it the same ship or not? And some people will say, well, of course it's the same ship. I mean, what other ship could it be? It's the same ship that's going across. But other people will say, well, not a single part of that ship is the same as it was before. So there's this idea of if you have someone at the end of their life cycle who's completely different, has completely different genes, has completely different cells, and everything about them is different, but you can trace their life cycle over the course of their life. It's been the same person technically. Are they the same person at the end of their journey? So I think this movie does an interesting job kind of getting at that idea of what does it mean to be immortal? Because if you ask, what does it mean to be immortal? You have to ask, well, in what form do you have to stay to really feel like, yeah, I'm immortal? If you chopped off every part of yourself, lost all your memories, and lived forever, most people would say, well, yeah, technically maybe I'm living forever, but I'm not the same person. Like, that doesn't help me at all. You need to first say, well, what do I need? Do I need to retain my memories? Do I have to retain my appearance? Like, what is it that makes me me? That's the first step you need before you even start to go about making yourself immortal. Okay, but now for the non-cop-out answer. Is she a clone or not? Well, slight cop-out. I think if you believe that what she was telling the guy who was interrogating her, how she was describing the events, in particular the final sequence, if she's describing it accurately and what we're seeing is what actually happened, then no, she's clearly not a clone. She just happens to have the mutated DNA, but she's still the same person. She's not a switched copy like her boyfriend. But you have to bear in mind that if she was a clone, she would probably lie about the course of how she got out of the Shimmer. So we have to maybe see her as an unreliable narrator, and potentially not everything we said is true. So I think it's open to interpretation. If you believe that she was telling the truth, I think pretty clearly she's not a clone. But if you believe that maybe she was not actually giving the accurate facts, I think that it's open to interpretation. And then whether or not she's a clone, whether or not she has the alien DNA, I think this has to do with her tattoo a little bit. So what's the deal with the tattoo? This is the part that makes no sense from a kind of mutation standpoint, a kind of gene hopping standpoint. It makes no sense why she would grow the same tattoo that we see other people in the Shimmer have. That doesn't make any sense. The tattoo has nothing to do with your genes. So either it's just something that doesn't make any sense, or this tattoo, it's a kind of symbol of the Shimmer. And when you're completely kind of taken over by the Shimmer, by its DNA, by that kind of mindset, you just grow this tattoo as a kind of symbolic sign that you're now part of the Shimmer. Now, the tattoo, it's an Ouroboros, so it's a snake eating itself. It's symbolic of a cycle of birth and of growth and death and rebirth, and how creation is a form of destruction, and that ties with the title of the movie, Annihilation, and how this seems to be, Natalie Portman gives a monologue at the end, how no, it's not just destroying, it's just creating new things, and sometimes you have to destroy to make way for something new. So I think you can interpret the tattoo as kind of a symbol that whether she's a clone or whether she just has a lot of this alien DNA, she's now part of the Shimmer. Now, why were all the characters female? I think it's because in the book they were all female. I don't think the director was trying to make any kind of point. I haven't heard anyone give any kind of analysis for why it made any kind of difference to the story that it was women. One person said it's because, it was an allegory for cancer, or an allergy for cancer, whatever word you want to use, and breast cancer is the most common form of cancer, and women are more affected by cancer than men. None of those things are true. So I don't think it had anything to do with them being women as far as an analysis standpoint, which is unfortunate because the director, his last film, Ex Machina, I thought it had some great stuff to do with gender there. So I was actually one of my many disappointments, and I guess that brings me to why this was a deeply disappointing movie for me. So this movie's going to be like the new Blade Runner, where it doesn't do good at the box office, and people say, oh, it's too intellectual, audiences are dumb, and they'll make all kinds of excuses rather than the obvious explanation, which it's not a good movie. Now, this is not a hard thing to adapt. If you look at the book that it's based on, it's an easy book to adapt. It's pretty high concept as far as being easy to communicate the idea. It's not like Gerald's Game, where they're adapting something which is a woman tied into a bed and she's having conversations with herself for the whole book. That's something that's hard to adapt, and maybe audiences aren't going to respond. This is actually a really fun idea to adapt, and all the stuff that I like about the movie, all the stuff that people are giving it credit for, all these themes, I don't know how much credit you can give because it's all there in the book. It's they're just adapting something that's a very interesting book with a lot of interesting themes. So I don't give it a lot of credit for the themes. Of course, I love that there's a movie like this where it gets people talking about these ideas, and I really enjoyed making this video and talking with people about the movie. So I'm glad that more movies like this are getting made. But if you look at the actual execution, if I look at how the movie was executed, who they picked to cast, the visuals, the music, huge disappointment. Now let me say, the last 20 minutes I thought were quite good. A lot of great twists. Really, really cool when she's facing off with the doppelganger, and the doppelganger is kind of mirroring her emotions, and she's got to kind of figure out how to outsmart it. It's just a great scene, very scary, very unsettling. And there were some other scenes. So when they're discovering the footage of the teams that went before, kind of going insane and losing it, that's great, and set up the potential for this to have been a great horror movie, and with a really scary, dark tone. And when we see the Scream Bear, that was just a fantastic scene, great design of the bear, just a scary scene all around. But those moments were so few and far between. For the most part, it was just very slow, very boring. You're not scared at all. I wouldn't call this a scary movie. And you're not being wowed by the visuals of the actual Shimmer. It's not this trippy, psychedelic looking place where everything's upside down and the rules are different. No, it just looks like a forest. It looks like a normal forest, and a pretty boring forest. There's barely any animals, barely anything going on. It's like you have an hour and 40 minutes of that, and maybe once every 20 minutes you'll see a flower. That's a bit strange. And again, it looks way more tame and normal than so many things that exist on a normal Earth without all these mutations. So disappointed with the visuals, and the characters, very forgettable. There was 5, by the way. Now it looked like there were 4 a lot of the times. I realized there was a 5th character. That's how forgettable she was. And the performances and the characters right down the line, even Natalie Portman. Now, I loved Natalie Portman when she was Anne Boleyn. I thought she was great in Black Swan. She was okay in like Garden State and different movies like that, but she's really bad in Jackie. I thought she was absolutely awful. I don't think she's really compelling and good to watch in this. Jennifer Jason Leigh, again, someone who I really like. I didn't really like watching her in this, so you're left with characters that are either really forgettable, barely make an impact, or just kind of unpleasant to watch. There's nothing, you never root for them, you're never interested in them, so the characters aren't good. The visuals, really, I just can't stress that enough, that, I mean, you're so excited when you see the Shimmer and the border to go in and be in this world, and you're on the edge of your seat, and then you get in there and there's just not much there. You don't feel like you're in this jungle and this wilderness, and there's a sense of danger, and there's these hybrids, these beasts, these monsters. You never feel that. You never feel like you're in this magical place with all these new exciting things to look at. Again, it was one of the most boring forests and stretches of land that I could imagine. So if I'm trying to assess the film of how good a film it is, I love the fact that I love the source material that they adapted. I love the fact that they did adapt it. I think it's a great thing to make a movie about. I love the themes that they were exploring, or at least trying to explore, and I loved a few scenes here or there. But on the whole, my experience of watching the movie, it was okay, but it wasn't particularly positive. I wouldn't say it was keeping me on the edge of my seat, really interesting. It was kind of meh. And audiences who have that reaction, who walk out of it saying, well, it's kind of boring, it's kind of slow, you shouldn't just call them dumb. Like, it's not because they didn't get it, it's just because, no, it was a very slow movie with not a lot going on for most of the movie. And as far as rewatching the movie goes, I'll never rewatch it. I know that right now. I may rewatch the Scream Bear scene and the ending sequence, and that's it. I don't want to see any of those visuals again. The ice trees on the sand, that was a highlight, and I have no desire to see that again. So I'll never rewatch it. I don't really want to rewatch a lot of the scenes from it. So very disappointing. Again, I went in with huge expectations. I actually saw the trailer to this, and then it got the positive buzz. So I couldn't have gone in with better expectations. It couldn't be more up my alley as far as a movie goes, and I'll never watch it again. So huge disappointment. Definitely one of the, say, most overrated. And now, people are going to rush in to defend it and kind of talk about, oh, anyone who doesn't like it, they're just dumb and they just didn't get it. No, it's a really disappointing movie, just really bad execution. And it's unfortunate because, like I say, Ex Machina, great movie. That was his last one. I think it's great sci-fi, just a great movie in general. So disappointing.